Hello everybody and welcome to Taunton Station. Now today I'm not going to be making a video on the trains, but I am going to be making a video on the buses. Now at the moment, the First Somerset fleet, previously known as the Buses of Somerset to many of us Somerset residents, has an ageing bus fleet. However, at the end of April 2025, probably the month that this video goes out on, we are getting some new Taunton electric buses, and later in the year, around July, August time, we are getting some more new electric right buses for the 28 Quantock line route between Taunton and Minehead. Here is my first bus, which is vehicle 44510, which is a quite old Enviro 200. This has a slightly more modern interior than some of the other buses that we have in the Buses of Somerset fleet. However, I am expecting this bus to transfer to other parts of the FirstBus region, but maybe not to be scrapped.
Those, mate. Got your address if you want. No.
As that right street light goes, unless it's alone, it will probably be staying in Somerset. Here I am now in Taunton town centre after taking a ride on the number 1 service, which will be getting new electric Taunton E10 vehicles. Here I am now at Taunton Castle Way, which is the main area for buses in the town centre and is located right next to the old bus station on Tower Street, which closed in March 2020 and is supposed to be reopening. However, I don't think it will ever reopen for quite some time, since in around about a year, maybe 10 months, they have made absolutely no progress on kicking NHS out. They've not even, started any of the works yet. Anyway, I had a little while until my next bus, which would be a Enviro 400 on the number 25 service. I decided to do some bus spotting, and we saw quite a lot of these ex-Bristol Enviro 400s. These originally started their life in London, then moved to Leicester, then to Bristol and Weston-super-Mare, and now to Taunton, where they will probably finish their life. A lot of these Enviro 400s have already made their way to the scrapyard. Anyway, here is a Stagecoach Southwest Enviro 400 on the Park and Ride service. Here is a Taunton's Town Buses Enviro 200 Dart. I would imagine these will be staying until around July-August time, since the electric buses for the Taunton to Minehead service have been delayed and will not be arriving until July or August. However, here is my next bus, which was this absolutely amazing Enviro 400. This particular vehicle was ex-Cornwall and ex-Devon 33421. This originally started its life with First Devon and Cornwall, operating on the service, I believe, between Exeter and Bude. I think it was something like that. However, it was definitely with First Devon, and then it moved to First Kerner when First Devon stopped operating and most of the operations were taken over by Stagecoach, and then it transferred later on in its life along with 33420 and 33422, which is no longer with us, up to Somerset. 33420 still occasionally roams around Somerset on long distance services, usually the 21 or the 22. Anyway, I'll be taking 33421 all the way out to near Norton Fitzwarren. The area is known as Cross Keys, however it's fairly close to Norton Fitzwarren, I was going to go all the way into Norton Fitzwarren Village Centre, however this bus is running around about 20 minutes late. This vehicle will probably be making its way to the scrapyard very soon once the electric buses come in. However, there were plans for either 33420 or 33441 to be preserved. However, I'm not too sure how far that's gone. They're good buses, but unfortunately, not everything you like stays forever. Anyway, like I said earlier, I'm going to be taking this to Cross Keys on the number 25 service, which will be changing very soon. Arriving at Taunton railway station again, this time at the south side bus stop instead of the north side bus stop. The south side bus stop is generally used for buses going out of Taunton, either north or west. For example, the number 28 service, which kind of goes northwest, and the number 25 that we're on, which just heads west. Now from Easter Sunday, the 25 will no longer be running all the way to Dulverton. Only a number of services will be continuing to Langley Corner on the outskirts of Wiveliscombe, and there will be a new shuttle service 25A, which will just be operated between Taunton and Cotford St Luke. Luckily though, there will still be a bus in place between Wiveliscombe, Bampton and Dulverton. However, this will be a new Somerset Council 26 service, and will probably be operated by minibuses, so it won't be as good as getting a double-decker, especially since the views on that part of the route are some of the best on the FirstBus network in this area. my next bus arriving at Cross Keys, which is first vehicle 35564. As it turns out, I'd be going on this exact bus later on in the video in Bridgwater. As for now, I decided to sit at the top at the front, which is one of the best seats on the bus, maybe not the best, and I decided to go all the way back into the town centre whilst passing the Berries coaches depot, which looks very interesting from here. Unfortunately, you can't really gain access to it unless you work for Berries coaches. Vehicles such as this one are vehicles that I am looking for today. You quite often find these, however on the day I was filming this, not too many of them were actually out. A lot of them were sat in the depot, and these will be going when the electric buses arrive, which is good and bad. It'd be nice for one of these to be preserved, however, especially if 33420 or 33421 gets preserved, I think it is very unlikely that these will get preserved, considering that these are absolutely knackered and are in dire need of some cleaning. These are really dusty in a lot of places, and the seats are worn right down to the bare bone on a lot of the vehicles, especially at the back. A lot of the seats at the back, which they're not really proper seats, they're just stick-on seats, are actually starting to come off, and you could probably, if you're clever enough, just rip one off. I wouldn't do that, however, you could probably do that. It'd be quite funny, but then again, I'm not too sure FirstBus would be very happy. Anyway, here we are arriving back at Taunton station, which its bus service is actually getting downgraded once the April timetable changes take shape. We are passing one of the slightly newer ex-Arriva London Enviro 400s just departing Castle Way. I would imagine that some of these will be staying for a little bit longer whilst we try and get some more newer double-decker buses, probably electric ones again. Here is our next bus arriving into Taunton on the 22 service to Rockwell Green via Wellington. I was going to take this all the way to Wellington town centre, however all of the buses were running quite late and I thought that I was going to miss my next bus. It actually turned out I could have made it near enough to Wellington to the outskirts at Chelston before I would have had to come back. In the end I only went as far as the crematorium on the outskirts of Taunton, just because I wanted to try and get the bus back in, since it was an Enviro 300 and there are not very many of these left at all. For some reason or another, I use the bus of Somerset every day and I seem to get this vehicle an awful lot, so you could say that it's my stalker vehicle. Anyway, I don't mind getting this vehicle quite a lot, however it would be quite nice to get another vehicle sometimes, such as 33420, which I don't seem to get very often at all. Anyway, here we are leaving Castle Way. I'm just going to be taking this to the crematorium, however this bus has a final destination of Rockwell Green. At the moment the 22s are split into several services, the 22, 22A, 22B and X22. However, from Easter Sunday, which is the 20th of April, when the timetable changes happen, the 22B service is being withdrawn and extra 22 services are being implemented, and the X22 college service, which runs all the way to Taunton, will become the 22C. I personally think, no matter if it's a college day or a college holiday, this service should run, since it's quite a useful bus to have between Taunton and Taunton. 300, leaving the crematorium on its way to Rockwell Green. Somehow I did make it across to the other side of the road to get the bus back into Taunton, which ended up being very late. Nevertheless though, it was this X21 Enviro 300. This still wears the 21 livery, however most of the time it finds itself on the 28. Today though, it was on the 22A services all day between Taunton and Tonedale. Here we are arriving back at Castle Way after a trip on the 22A on this Enviro 300. A lot of people, especially from Somerset, dislike the Enviro 300s since R1s originally started in Glasgow and then came down to Somerset, and since then a few of them have been to Leicester and back. So they are quite knackered after doing all of those miles around Glasgow and then transferring down to Somerset. It doesn't help that I've heard from bus drivers that these buses are completely rotten, and to be honest, I wouldn't be surprised. So if they are rotten, then God help us. Although saying that, I do like the Enviro 300s, but they are leaving us around July, August time when the new Wright electric buses enter service with the buses at Somerset. Anyway, I decided to get a ride on that one whilst I could, since there's only 4 or 5 Enviro 300s left in our fleet, and there weren't very many of them out on that day, and they were all on the other side of the county. Anyway, here is another Enviro 400, which is an ex-Bristol one. I was going to be taking this on the 21 back to Bridgwater, however, it ended up going out of service to the depot, since the 21 was having a few issues today, and that service was quite late. That passed away to take me just north of Bridgwater bus station on the 21 service. This was first 33556 and looked in fairly good condition compared to some of the other ones. However, to be honest, all of these are in quite bad nick. I didn't manage to film very much on this bus, since after leaving Castaway, when it got to the Primark bus stop in Taunton town centre, right in the heart of the town centre, the bus got really busy, and I ended up having to sit next to somebody the entire way back to Bridgwater, so apologies if I didn't get to film too much. However, I think I got some good clips between Monkton Heathfield and North Petherton around Thurloxton. at Bridgwater bus station. I'll be back here later on in the video unexpectedly. However, I actually didn't get off here because I needed to go to the Range bus stop on Bristol Road to go in the Range to get some supplies. After going in the Range, I was going to get another one of these back down to maybe North Petherton, Monkton, Heathfield, wherever the buses passed on the 21 route, since the 21 route was all over the place today due to traffic problems in Bridgwater. However, my iPad didn't have much battery and neither did my phone, so in the end I ended up getting another bus back home to Paulin. Arriving at the Range bus stop to take me back home. I would imagine that this bus will be staying with the buses of Somerset for a little bit longer.